Hello, my name is Ellis, and my teammates Katie, Luke, and Brennan and I will all be talking about our scholarly idea, which is based on the question, how do aspects of our identity and their interactions guide and constrain our experience of place? Our answer to this question is that aspects of our identity are shaped by both our psychological and physical environment, which dictate our relationship with the places we inhabit. The first source that will be talked about is the book On Trails by Robert Moore. This is a book that we read over the summer and have talked about throughout the course of the Catalyst class. A key passage that I found was on page 95 in chapter 3. It reads, "We may not be able to read other animals' minds, but we can read their trails. In learning to do so, we have become recognizably human. Hunting animals, we have sharpened our intelligence and invented some of our earliest technologies. Herding animals, we reap the reliable luxuries of milk and meat, leather and wool. Harnessing animals, we tilled fields, transported goods, and built cities. And studying animals' wisdom, we have increased our own." The analysis that I would like to go into is on this pyramid of animals, cities, and society today. When we first started building society or creating the society that we have today, we had to start somewhere, and we started from learning from animals. Animals have basic instincts and patterns that left us ways to develop the paths in the society that we have today. Animals learned how to survive in the environment that they lived in, and people learned to do the same. When we first started having society, they did not have such things as steel buildings or concrete on the sidewalks, and they did not have the paths that all of our cars can drive on today. They had fields, they had farms, they did not have the built-in paths that a lot of us are born into at this time. From animals, we were able to harness any of their resources, which could be wool or anything like that, and we were able to, from there, build onto fields, which then was able to create trails that led to cities, that led to materials that we could use. We learned how to use the environment around us to build the second part of the pyramid, which is cities, which are just multidimensional areas of space for people to live in. As we went from rural to urban cities, we were able to become more advanced in the technology that we possessed. We were able to build on past progress from not only people but animals as well, and we were able to learn from past mistakes and build upon that to create the complex society that we have today, which is the top of the pyramid. The bottom line is that people have taken their physical environment and studied social patterns to create the world that we live in today. And that is how it pertains to our question of how aspects of our identity guide or constrain our experience of place.
Our second source was entitled Identity Coactivation, Person and Situation Influences, and the Mediating Role of Experienced Conflict. This source was a summary of an experiment that investigated the cognitive and emotional impact that having two conflicting identities has on a person. The example given in the article was that of an Indian HR manager who is in a hiring meeting regarding a request for visa sponsorship. In this example, there was a conflict between the manager's Indian identity and wanting to get visas for international job applicants because she can relate to them, and her managerial identity and wanting to cut expensive visa costs when possible. The experiment found that the varying levels of identification with each aspect of a person's identity influenced both the level of anxiety that the person experienced and which identity the person acted with. So essentially, if there are two strong identities clashing, there's a lot of anxiety that results from the situation. But if a strong identity clashes with a weaker identity, then the strong identity becomes dominant and there's much less anxiety associated with the situation. So it found that people's psychological response to the coactivated identity, it will affect how they experience their place. For example, the Indian HR manager will begin to associate her place of work with stress, And the experiment found that often coactivated identities cause people to associate various emotions with certain locations. With a coactivated identity, our physical environments can even come to dictate our identity by deciding for us which aspect will become dominant. And the concern with this is that your environment will come to dictate your entire identity. In the example of the Indian HR manager, she has to decide how she's going to identify, and how she chooses to identify at work will also then transfer into the rest of her life. An example of this would be if she chooses to identify as a manager, then she may lose touch with her Indian identity and other aspects of her life. And so this source was really trying to make us aware of how these small decisions with our relation to our place, how they impact our identity and the rest of our lives.
All right, moving on to the next slide. So, bridging several worlds, the process of identity development of second-generation Ethiopian and Eritrean young women in Canada. So basically, this article highlights second-generation Ethiopian and Eritrean adolescents, in particular young women. This article goes over the struggles of bridging their old heritage to their new heritage in a foreign environment. These immigrants face social and economic changes when moving, when in most cases made the transition harder. Additionally, gender of the second-generation adolescents made the transition more difficult, as there are perceived social standards and pressures due to their gender. So these are some of the few key points that help progress my understanding of the research question and will help answer our scholarly idea. Firstly, heritage is a factor of our identity and can play a role in adjustment to a new place. Secondly, gender also plays a role in adapting to the place around us based on social standards. Thirdly, depending on the place you're in, either the culture can choose to support or oppose your identity. Finally, the people close to you impact and shape who you are and your identity.
This natural sciences source covers the idea that genes influence gender identity. Essentially, it covers the fact that previously only hormones played a role in one's gender, and that was the general belief that scientists understood because they didn't have evidence to prove otherwise. However, the problem with this evidence is that it didn't explain why transgender people feel as if they're in the wrong body but maintain normal hormone levels. So when this new evidence came to be, it essentially states that genes also play a role in the making of a female or male brain, and this was really, really important to address this problem because a huge misconception with transgender peoples was, a lot of people's argument was, hey, you have normal hormone levels, why are you acting like you feel misplaced? So in turn, when this happened and this new evidence came into light, it was really significant because it offered a scientific explanation as to why transgender peoples feel misplaced when they are placed into the wrong body. So obviously gender plays a major role in identity with all of the movements going on, especially in the century we live in, and we have so many feminist movements still going on to this day, and there have been a lot of ideals surrounding the idea that gender is a part of who we are. And so this struggle for people to find oneself, especially within being transgender, is really, really an important component of identity, because feeling as if you're misplaced and that like you can't truly be who you are and that you aren't who you are with the body you have is something that can challenge somebody emotionally and physically for their entire lives. And this kind of leads into the main point of how this affects our place both physically and time period, and how that in family values and how all these things overlap to this idea that if somebody feels as if they're misplaced or if they feel as if they're struggling with who they are based off of their surroundings and their time period and their family and the ideals of the time period, it really affects how we as individuals grow and how we feel at any given moment in time, and how that affects not only our identity, but like how we feel about our place and our surroundings. For example, if we go back a couple centuries, obviously transgender peoples were not accepted whatsoever. So if it was, I don't know, 1950, or even back earlier than that, and somebody were to come out to their parents and say that they felt like they were a man placed in a woman's body, and their parents were extremely Catholic or any of these things, that could make them feel like they are wrong, and then all of their interactions in that place could feel faulty based off of that. So essentially, this is just the idea that who we are, how we feel at any given moment in time, and especially for transgender people, is this idea that identity is such a large part of who they are, and coming to terms with that and the struggle with that and all the things they had to go through to get there can strongly influence how they interact with their environment based off of how comfortable with themselves they are. Finally, this is our works cited pages, where we have cited all of the sources we have discussed in this article in case you would like to reference them or read more about the sources we have discussed.